Okay. As Hala said, I did a little bit of this last month, and I just thought I would kind of change gears a little bit and talk about the two types of gas systems you're most likely going to see out here in the field. The first one is the traditional gas system that you see. This is on the left. You see the meter here, typically white dial. Um, but part of the country also has a 2 pound system, 2 PSI system. Um, I'm in Hampton Roads, Virginia. We have tons of these. We have them all over Hampton Roads and many parts of Virginia. And these are called the 2 pound systems. Now, change. Um, your traditional system, as far as pressure goes, it is so low. We measure it in with a manometer. So it's maybe up about 7 inches or so of water column. You always see guys on TV in the action movies and stuff. They'll jerk a gas line out from behind a piece of equipment and it's waving around and it's spraying gas everywhere. I always point out that that's movie pressure. That's not real pressure. A gas line, a traditional gas line, if we were to break it down, probably something a little more understandable, about a quarter of a pound of pressure, somewhere in that range. Not a lot of pressure. But in order to sell gas, a lot of the gas companies started pushing, I would say 30 years ago, a 2 pound system. Now, the 2 pound system allows us to use a much smaller gas line. And if you can use a smaller gas line, and in many cases, it could be copper or it could be CSST, you can pipe the houses quicker. They can sell more gas, of course, if you're out there jamming these things. And things like gas logs and stuff like that are real easy to pop in instead of doing the old process of cutting and threading pipe. And, it just takes forever. So, anyway, the 2 pound system was developed. The 2 pound system was developed to, again, make it easier and honestly to sell more gas. Okay. But now we're still only talking 2 pounds of pressure. 2 pounds of pressure, though, is about 8 times the normal pressure. So there's quite a bit of pressure there. If you look at the slide, see the yellow arrow pointing to that little gas line? That gas line is probably handling the water heater and the furnace. And it's a 3/8 inch gas line. Outside dimensions are 3/8 inch. And it can do that because the pressure is so high, 2 pounds of pressure. We can get it to a regulator that's close to the equipment at the higher pressure, and then pass it through the regulator and drop it down as needed for the individual equipment. So if just looking at that, you realize that would certainly be easier for a plumber or an HVAC guy to pull that little tube to the other side of the house without cutting and threading pipe and so forth. And that is exactly why it makes it easier, because we can do that. We typically would buy this tubing in a 50 or a 60 pound or 60 foot roll. So I can run a lot of tubing with this system without actually having to put fittings in there. So it's going to make it a lot quicker. Now, if you do need fittings, with copper, you're supposed to braze, not solder the lines. You braze the lines, silver braze, like you would be, working on HVAC lines, or you can flare the lines. And flaring the lines is surface, it's real acceptable. A lot of guys like to do that. Personally, I find more flaring with the plumbers, and I find more brazing with HVAC guys when they switch over and they're doing some gas piping work. With copper, you have to put a little sticker on there to let us know that it is copper. You don't want a guy up under the house with a pair of tubing cutters and he's all of a sudden cutting the gas line thinking it's a water line. He's going to have a real problem if he does. So with copper, you do have to mark it. With CSST, it's already marked, so we don't have to really worry about that. Again, look how small the line is. And on CSST, you probably never get above a 1/2 inch line for the 2 pound system. If you look against the wall here, there's a small piece of copper. It's a ½ inch sticking out of the wall. Somebody's brazed a male adapter onto the end of it, and then he screwed on the gas cock, and then of course you can see the black iron. You got your sediment trap there, but there's the regulator, and that regulator is what makes this 2-pound system work. He's got 2 pounds of pressure up to the regulator. Again, CSST is fine. The yellow, less and less as this is being used in areas where they are using it. We're having, to bond it and do things to it. It just made it more of a pain for guys. They started with the black material. The black material, typically you don't have the problems that you have. So it's not as much work. So what I'm finding here, it could be the same in other places, is people just kind of jump on the copper bandwagon. They just run copper. But I know there are areas of the country where they won't allow you to run natural gas through a copper line. And I understand that. Here we have no problems. I've been doing this. This is my 50th year in the plumbing and HVAC business this year. And I've been doing it a long time. I haven't had any issues to speak. Yeah. Am I hearing someone speak?
If we get people to mute your mics, if somebody's got their mic on, just mute your mic.
Okay, well, back to the CSST. Here's a system where they've manifolded it. They've run, you can see where the valve is on the right side here. Somebody's run the gas up to a manifold with the CSST, and then they've branched off from there. Here's a good explanation, or a good example, I guess, to show you of how the regulator is positioned. The line on the left is coming in at 2 pounds of pressure. It's coming from the meter. The gas would flow in this direction, and it would flow through the regulator. Well, in the regulator, it enters at 2 pounds of pressure, and then it breaks it back down to that lower pressure, the traditional pressure, and it looks like it's going to 3 different things here. This is in an attic, so I would imagine there's probably a furnace up there or a water heater nearby. You can see a shutoff valve right there. The other 2 lines might go down to a gas log or something, maybe a range or whatever. But anyway, as these things come online, that regulator opens and allows more gas pressure to flow through the meter, or gas volume flow through the regulator itself and get to the individual appliances. So it's able to do that. Now, one of the problems we've had over the years with regulators is because most regulators will need to be vented. And if you look at this regulator, it's kind of a cutaway of one of the traditional regulators. See where it says vent port? That vent port is usually where we would have a fitting, and a small piece of tubing would branch off somewhere where it could vent in case the regulator, I keep saying meter, in case the regulator gets a hole in that diaphragm. The red dotted line shows you the diaphragm. So if a hole would come into that diaphragm, what will happen is the gas will flow through the diaphragm, and it would come out the vent port. And of course, if it's piped outside somewhere or to a safe location, and that's not going to be a problem. But we want to put these regulators all over the house and in the attics and places like that. They have to be accessible, but we want to be able to put them inside. So what someone has done is they've created a device that, instead of venting it, we screw it in that vent port, and it's called a vent limiter. And what it does is, if there's a hole in the regulator, there's a little ball in there, it's a little plastic ball. That ball will float up and kind of restrict the gas as it comes out. Now, it's generally not going to be a positive shutoff, but there's not much going to come out of there. I've seen a few of these fail, and what happens is you can usually smell a little gas, so it kind of alerts you to that there is a problem. So the gas can't escape there. But when you realize you got a problem, these regulators are fairly inexpensive. We just turn off the gas and we replace the regulator. Now, if the regulator is outside, in most cases, we'll put something like this on there. This is basically a little umbrella device. it'll just vent to the outside, So if you've got a package unit or you've got a piece of equipment outside, we can use these. They also make a little thing, and some guys will make on their own a little device that looks like a candy cane. We call them the candy cane. It just comes up and curls down. It curls down, so we won't get water and and maybe ice and so forth in there. But if it's inside, that vent limiter allows them to run this system, and if the regulator can breathe, the diaphragm can move up and down. And if it does fail, again, you might smell something, but it's not going to flood the house with gas, and there's not going to be any real issues. I have seen the ones with the candy canes actually get clogged up before, like a mud dauber or something would get in there. And what happens usually when a regulator can't breathe, it jams up. It'll kind of get stuck on a pressure. Maybe it won't open as needed and so forth. And many times I've actually pulled the little thing apart, put a toothpick or something in there, got the little clog broken up, put it back in, everything is fine. But this device is probably more preferred. And again, we kind of call it an umbrella, but the thing can breathe underneath, and the water and ice and stuff won't actually get in the valve. How about that, Hollis? We good?
I believe so. Yeah. Appreciate your time. That's
Hey, listen, guys, anybody has questions on this stuff, just go to the plumbing and HVAC guy, at gmail.com. Email me, you can, if you need to get a hold of me, email is the best way. But anyway, a good friend of mine is getting ready to speak to you now, Stanley. Stanley and I actually have a business together here in Virginia Beach. He bought out my school recently, but we'd love to have you come here if you're ever in Virginia Beach. Come by and see us. Come by and see the school. So, Hollis, I'm good to go.
All right. So, Stanley, if you want to share your screen, we're going to get you started a couple of minutes earlier than we expected to. But if you start here at 8:23 and give us a full 60 minutes, that takes us to 9:23, and right. We might actually get out of here a few minutes early.
Hey, Hollis, Ronald Pigeon had a good question about if it's covered with snow. I think it was Ronald Pigeon. Yeah.
Are you our chat monitor, Scott?
Yeah, I am. Sorry about that.
There you go.
Steve Baldwin.
Kenny, we got a question for you.
Okay. If it's covered with snow, snow's going to have a little air in it, and it'll typically be able to breathe through that. The candy cane would probably be more prone to getting some ice up inside of it or something like that than the umbrella. The umbrella is like a little shaft that comes up in the center, and then that thing lays over it. It'd be pretty easy to breathe. I'll just tell it to you like this. I've never had that to be a problem. That said, we don't have a lot of snow in Hampton Roads, but we have had snow, so it does happen from time to time. I just haven't seen that, but it's got to be able to breathe if the regulator can't breathe. Where I have seen people make a mistake is they would actually not have anything in there, and water and then becoming ice, water freezing is more of a problem. Is obviously more of a problem. It's like I said earlier, a dirt clog, from a dirt dog or something like that gets in there. That's a problem. It's got to be able to breathe. That diaphragm's got to be able to move up and down. As things come online on the outlet side, that thing's going to be lifting up and allowing more air to flow through. And if you can actually see it, like I said, you would see the diaphragm move up and down. So it's got to be able to breathe if something gets clogged up in there. The 2-pound system basically has its own guidelines. I've been to the school twice. It was essentially the same thing, and I took it 15 years later, 15 years apart, and they were basically the same class. Most of the 2-pound system that we had to change compared to a steel pipe or black iron or something like that is the pipe's obviously more likely that it can be damaged, but CSST is that way too. So we just have to protect it better. We have to make sure we have stud guards and things like that in place. we typically will drill a hole bigger for the 3/8 inch line. The belief is if somebody nails a baseboard or something onto a wall and the nail goes through, it will hopefully push the tube out of the way instead of penetrating it. But I can tell you from experience, that tubing doesn't always jump out of the way if they shoot that nail in there with a nail gun. So, but I mean, that would come up during the pressure test. But, a little different rules, I don't know if it's still accessible now. The ASHI reporter has an article in there that Alan Carson and I wrote years ago about how, the bottom line was changing. We were using copper and 2-pound systems, and it's used all over Canada apparently. And but it's a little bit different. It's obviously you're not too worried about a nail getting a steel pipe, but you are worried about it getting CSST. You're worried about it getting copper, but you're going to save so much time. You're going to save a tremendous amount of time. And for something like running a line from a meter to handle a gas log or something like that, it's just so much easier. It saves a fortune. Most of your money in plumbing, most of your money in HVAC is probably going to be spent on labor. So this will just save so much labor time for that.
All right. So we got any more questions, Scott? Scott,
somebody says they were. Hey, Hollis, somebody says they were told that the yellow CSST was no longer allowed around here. I'm sure that's true in some places. In Virginia, we're required to put a statement in our reports to tell people what the concern is with the CSST that was put in a long time ago, before the code actually addressed it, and the code guys actually looked at it. For many years it was going in. Code guys weren't looking at it. The HVAC guys, maybe put it in. Maybe a plumber would put it in. Electrician said, I'm not messing with it, so they wouldn't bond it or anything. So what's happened over the years is there's been some changes. So if you're told that they don't allow anymore, sure, they don't. But I mean, I was told one time they didn't get it anymore. While I was at the factory and we walked in, I thought you said you didn't make it. He said, well, we make it for Canada. And I kind of chuckled. I thought, what are you talking about? And he just said, well, they've bonded it since it started, since the program started, and they don't have the concerns that we have down here. And in areas of thunderstorms and things like that, they have more problems. Apparently not as many thunderstorms up there as well.
So what about the black CSST? Does it have to be grounded?
The black CSST, the way it's made, it keeps that electrical potential together. A lot of times with the yellow, the connections would lose their electrical potential. There were so many parts and things like that they could break down. So the new black is, it's not even new, it's newer. A lot of guys got together on that. They've, pushed the idea that the yellow was problematic and that you need to do the black. In most cases, the black does not have to be, any additional work done to it, no additional bonding or anything like that. But, again, all this stuff is fluid. It changes from time to time. As I said, I've been doing this a long time, and there's some things that we did 50 years ago we would never do today. So, we learn over time. So you might have an area where they say just no yellow, and the black's available. All the major companies make the black. So
that's it. Now we are starting to step on step.
It was fascinating to watch this stuff being made. It was crazy the way this stuff was being made. And it was interesting too. I mentioned something to the guy about the stainless steel being exposed to the outdoors. And he says, well, we really shouldn't do that. You should cover it up, make sure it's wrapped up good so it's not exposed. And I said, well, it is stainless steel, right? He goes, yeah, but it's not that good of stainless steel. I thought, oh, okay. But anyway,
so Kenny, we are getting ready to step on some of Stanley's time here, but we still got this question about the gas odors. If you're smelling gas around the regulator, is that a good thing, bad thing, and not a big deal? What's the deal?
You shouldn't be smelling it. You shouldn't be smelling it. I hear people all the time talk about that. The gas you shouldn't be smelling it. And I always tell people, don't take a chance. Just call. Just tell them to call somebody and check it out. John Craner has been posting pictures when he does these new construction inspections where he's always smelling gas out by the meters, and 9 times out of 10 it's not even the regulator. 9 times out of 10, it's a union that's loose, a gasket that's been pinched on the meter or something like that. Anytime I ever smell gas in a house, I tell people I'll find it because
So what about minimum distance between a regulator and an ignition source?
Well, I mean, usually what we're talking about we're talking about the meter outside or something like that. That's going to be more of a locality thing. I've seen numbers everywhere from 3 to 6 feet on these things. It's more like the gas company is going to make that determination. Some of the things that we think about that we worry a lot about, sometimes we worry too much about some things, to be perfectly honest with you. I've had very, very little problems with something like that inside the house or something like that, but there's always a possibility that you'll get a leak and things can happen. So
you got to be careful about giving Kenny a microphone. It's hard to take it away from him.